Hi everyone, welcome back to a new Roblox story. This time the story is about the popular Roblox game 99 Nights in the Forest. As always, not all of our stories are based on true events, but some are, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the story, if you dare. Tom had never been good at scary games. His hands would shake, his heart would pound, and he'd usually quit after the first jump scare. But when his best friend Marcus challenged him to try 99 Nights in the Forest, Tom couldn't back down. Marcus had been bragging about reaching day 15, and Tom's competitive spirit kicked in. It's just a survival game, Tom told himself as he entered the lobby for the first time. How hard can it be? The lobby was buzzing with other players, all discussing strategies and sharing horror stories about their experiences in the forest. Tom listened carefully, trying to pick up tips that might help him survive longer than Marcus. The key is keeping your campfire burning, said a girl named Luna, who wore the gear of someone who had clearly made it far in the game. Never, ever let it go out at night. And watch out for the cultists, added another player called River. They attack every few days with better weapons each time. Tom nodded, taking mental notes. But it was an older player named Phoenix who gave him the advice that would stick with him the most. There are worse things than the deer monster out there, Phoenix said quietly. Things that follow different rules. If you make it past day 20, you'll start encountering them. The owl is the worst of all. Tom wanted to ask more questions, but Phoenix had already disappeared into a game server. Tom shrugged and started his own run, ready to prove he could beat Marcus's record. The first day was almost peaceful. Tom spawned in a small forest clearing with a basic campfire, crafting bench and grinder. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and everything felt safe and welcoming. Tom spent his time exploring the immediate area, gathering wood and learning the basic crafting recipes. He found some wild carrots and berries for food, chopped down several trees with his starting axe, and even killed a rabbit for meat. By evening, Tom felt confident about his survival skills. Then the sun went down. The moment darkness fell, the entire forest changed. The cheerful birdsong stopped. The wind through the leaves took on an ominous tone, and somewhere in the distance, Tom heard heavy footsteps that definitely didn't belong to any normal animal. Tom sat close to his campfire, flashlight in hand, waiting for whatever was coming. The footsteps got closer and closer, until Tom could see two glowing eyes watching him from just beyond the firelight. The deer monster. It was exactly as terrifying as the other players had described. Massive, standing on its hind legs like a twisted human, with bulging eyes and an unnaturally large head. It circled Tom's camp slowly, testing the edges of the safe zone created by the campfire. Tom's hands shook as he gripped his flashlight, but he remembered the advice about light being his only weapon against the creature. When the deer got too close, Tom shone the flashlight directly at it. The monster raised one clawed hand to block the light and stepped backward with an angry growl. The first night lasted forever, but Tom survived it. As dawn broke, the deer monster retreated into the forest, and Tom felt a surge of pride. He had made it through his first encounter with the game's primary antagonist. Days 2 through 5 passed in a similar pattern. Tom spent his daylight hours exploring further from his camp, gathering better resources and improving his base. He crafted a map that showed him the locations of treasure chests and important structures. He built walls around his camp for extra protection. He even found a spear, which made him feel much more confident about defending himself. Each night, the deer monster would return, but Tom was getting better at dealing with it. He learned the creature's patterns, understood exactly how close it could get to the campfire, and became skilled at using his flashlight to keep it at bay. On day 6, Tom encountered his first cultist camp. The robed figures attacked him on sight, but Tom's new spear made short work of them. He looted their camp and found valuable items, including something called a cultist gem that would be useful for advanced crafting. By day 10, Tom had rescued his first missing child, the Dino Kid, who had been guarded by a pack of wolves in a cave system. The rescue was difficult and dangerous, but Tom felt like a hero when he brought the traumatized child back to his camp. The kid set up a small tent near the campfire and rarely spoke, but Tom could see gratitude in his eyes. Day 15 came and went, and Tom realized he had beaten Marcus's record, but he didn't want to stop now. The game was becoming more interesting as he progressed, with new challenges and mysteries appearing regularly. Tom discovered abandoned structures scattered throughout the forest. Old laboratories, crashed planes, mysterious temples. Each location told part of a larger story about what had happened in this cursed woodland. There had been experiments, crashes, disappearances, and cover-ups. The forest held dark secrets that Tom was slowly uncovering. On day 17, Tom faced his first major cultist raid. Instead of encountering individual cultists in camps, an entire group attacked his base during the night. They came with drums beating and torches blazing, trying to destroy his campfire and kill both Tom and the rescued child. The battle was intense. Tom used his spear and bow to pick off the cultists while staying close enough to the campfire to remain safe from the deer monster, who watched the raid from a distance but didn't participate. Tom managed to defeat all the attackers, but not without taking significant damage and using up most of his medical supplies. After the raid, Tom found a note among the cultist bodies. It was written in shaky handwriting and said, "The forest remembers all who enter. Some visitors become permanent residents. The owl knows your name now." Tom didn't understand what the note meant, but it made him uneasy. Who was the owl? Was it another player or something else entirely? Days 18 through 20 passed relatively smoothly. Tom rescued the second missing child, Kraken Kid, from a bear-guarded cave. He upgraded his crafting bench to create better tools and weapons. He built additional defensive structures around his camp, including bear traps and crossbow turrets. Tom was feeling confident, maybe even a little cocky about his survival skills. He had beaten Marcus's record by 5 days and was well on his way to the ultimate goal of 99 days. The deer monster had become routine, the cultists were manageable, and Tom felt like he had mastered the game's systems. That confidence lasted until day 23. Tom was organizing his storage chests after a successful day of resource gathering when he heard something unusual. Instead of the heavy footsteps that announced the deer monster's arrival, there was a strange sound filling the forest, like wind blowing through the trees. But there was no wind. Tom looked around his camp. The leaves weren't moving, the campfire flames weren't flickering, yet the wind sound continued, growing louder and more ominous. Then text appeared on Tom's screen. "The owl has woken up." Tom's heart skipped a beat. He remembered Phoenix's warning from the lobby about things worse than the deer monster, about the owl being the worst of all. The night felt different immediately. Instead of the deer's familiar pattern of circling and testing his defenses, there was an eerie silence, broken only by that strange wind sound. Tom sat by his campfire with his flashlight ready, watching the darkness beyond the light. The two rescued children, Dino Kid and Kraken Kid, seemed to sense the change too. They had retreated into their tents and pulled the flaps shut tightly. Even they knew this night would be different. A massive shadow passed overhead. Tom looked up at the black sky but saw nothing except stars. Yet he had definitely seen something huge flying above the trees. Something with wings that blocked out the starlight as it passed. The wind sound stopped abruptly, leaving the forest in complete silence. Then, without any sound of landing, it was there. The owl stood at the very edge of the campfire's light, and Tom's breath caught in his throat. It was enormous, easily twice the size of a human, with wings that seemed to stretch forever when partially spread. Its feathers were a deep brown that looked almost black in the firelight, and its talons were the size of kitchen knives. But the most unsettling thing was its eyes. Two massive, round eyes stared at Tom without ever blinking. They weren't the angry red of the deer's hungry nights, but a deep, intelligent amber that seemed to see everything. The eyes were like windows into something ancient and knowing, something that had been watching the forest for much longer than any human presence. Above the owl's head, a strange symbol appeared, an icon of two eyes that glowed softly in the darkness. Tom tried to remember everything he had heard about the owl from other players. The rumors were confusing and contradictory. Some said it was easier to deal with than the deer monster if you knew the rules. Others claimed it was impossible to survive. But one piece of advice came back to him clearly. Don't move when the owl is watching. The eyes turn red if you move, white if you stay still. Tom froze completely. He didn't even dare to breathe deeply. The owl tilted its massive head to one side, studying him with those unblinking eyes. The eye symbol above it remained a neutral amber color, not red, not white, just glowing softly like a warning light. Seconds felt like hours. Tom's muscles began to cramp from staying perfectly still, but he didn't dare adjust his position even slightly. The owl continued to watch him with disturbing intensity, as if it was trying to read his thoughts or understand his intentions. Tom's flashlight, which had been resting in his lap, started to slip as his hands grew sweaty with fear. He could feel it sliding slowly toward the edge of his leg, but he didn't dare move to catch it. The flashlight rolled out of his lap and hit the ground with a soft thud. It was the tiniest movement. Tom's hand had relaxed just slightly as the flashlight fell, and he had instinctively flinched when it hit the ground. But it was enough. The eye symbol immediately turned bright red. The owl let out a screech that sounded like a combination of a hawk's hunting cry and a human scream of rage. The sound was so loud and piercing that Tom couldn't help but flinch again, which made the eyes glow even redder. "No, no, no," Tom whispered through clenched teeth. But it was too late. The owl spread its massive wings. They had to span at least 20 feet from tip to tip, and launched itself into the air. But instead of attacking Tom directly like the deer monster would have, the creature began circling overhead like a giant vulture waiting for prey to die. This wasn't a simple attack. This was something far more calculated and terrifying. As the owl flew in wide circles above the camp, Tom began to hear other sounds emerging from the dark forest around him. Howls, multiple howls, coming from different directions and getting closer. Wolves were approaching the camp. Tom realized with growing horror what was happening. The enraged owl was calling wolves to the area, using them as weapons against him. It was like a general commanding troops, directing an army of forest predators to do its bidding. But the rules were still in effect. If Tom moved, the situation would get worse. If he stayed still, the wolves would eventually reach him anyway. It was a perfect trap with no good options. The first wolf emerged from the tree line, slinking into the edge of the campfire light. It was massive, much larger than the normal wolves Tom had encountered during his explorations. This beast had glowing red eyes and foam around its mouth, and its fur was matted with what looked like blood. The wolf snarled when it saw Tom, bearing fangs that gleamed in the firelight, but it didn't attack immediately. Instead, it sat down just outside the fire's safe zone and waited, watching Tom with predatory patience. More wolves appeared. 2 from the east, 3 from the west, and then more from the north and south. Soon, Tom was surrounded by at least 8 massive wolves, all watching him with hungry eyes. But they weren't attacking. They were waiting for something. The owl landed again, this time even closer to the campfire than before. The eye symbol above its head was still bright red, pulsing like an angry heartbeat. Tom could see more details of the creature now. Its feathers had an oily, unnatural sheen, and there were strange markings on its beak that looked almost like writing. Tom understood the deadly game now. The owl would keep the wolves there as long as the eye symbol stayed red. If Tom moved even slightly, If he tried to reach for a weapon, adjust his position, or even scratch an itch, the wolves would attack in a coordinated assault. But if he stayed perfectly still, the wolves would eventually grow impatient and start circling closer and closer until staying still wouldn't matter anymore. They would gradually tighten their circle until Tom was within striking distance, and then they would attack whether he moved or not. "This is insane," Tom whispered through clenched teeth, trying not to move his lips. The closest wolf's ears perked up at the barely audible sound. It stood up and took a step closer to the fire, testing the boundaries of Tom's safe zone. Tom had to make a choice. He could stay still and hope the wolves would eventually lose interest, but that seemed unlikely given how focused they were on him. He could try to slowly reach for his spear, but any movement would trigger an immediate attack from all 8 wolves at once. Or he could try something completely different. Tom slowly, very slowly, moved his eyes toward where his flashlight had fallen. The wolves tensed when they saw his eye movement, but they didn't attack. Apparently, moving his eyes didn't count as movement that would trigger the assault. The flashlight was about 3 feet away from where Tom sat. If he could somehow reach it and shine the light at the owl, maybe he could change the eye symbol from red back to neutral or even white. It was a long shot, but it was the only plan Tom could think of. The problem was that reaching the flashlight would require Tom to lean forward and extend his arm, definitely enough movement to trigger the wolf's attack. He would have maybe 1 second to grab the light and point it at the owl before the wolves reached him. Tom took a deep breath and made his decision. He dove forward toward the flashlight. The moment Tom's body moved, the owl let out another piercing screech, and all 8 wolves charged at once. Tom's hand closed around the flashlight just as the first wolf leaped toward him. He rolled to one side and came up in a crouch, clicking on the flashlight and pointing it directly at the owl. The beam of light hit the massive bird creature right in its unblinking eyes. The owl immediately raised one wing to block the light, letting out an angry screech that was even louder than before. But something unexpected happened. Instead of making the situation worse, the light seemed to confuse the owl. The eye symbol above its head began flickering between red and neutral, as if the creature was fighting some internal battle. The wolves, who had been in mid-attack, suddenly stopped and looked around in confusion. Their coordination was broken. Without clear direction from the owl, they didn't know whether to continue their assault or retreat. Tom kept the flashlight beam steady on the owl, even though his hands were shaking with adrenaline and fear. The creature flapped its wings angrily and moved its head back and forth, trying to avoid the light, but Tom followed its movements with the beam. Gradually, the eye symbol began to change from red to neutral, then slowly toward white. As the symbol changed color, the wolves became less aggressive. They stopped snarling and started backing away from Tom's position. A few of them even laid down, as if they were falling asleep. Finally, the eye symbol turned completely white. The change in the owl's behavior was immediate and dramatic. Its posture relaxed, its wings folded, and its head tilted in what almost looked like curiosity rather than aggression. The creature looked at Tom with those massive amber eyes, and for a moment, Tom thought he saw something almost like respect in them. The owl let out a much softer call. Not a screech this time, but something that sounded almost musical. At this signal, the wolves stood up and began walking back into the forest. They moved calmly and peacefully, no longer under the influence of whatever rage had driven them to attack. Tom kept the flashlight pointed at the owl, not daring to lower it until he was sure the danger had passed. The creature watched him for several more minutes, then spread its wings and took flight. As it disappeared over the treetops, Tom could hear its calls echoing through the forest, but they sounded like communication rather than hunting cries now. Tom collapsed by his campfire, his whole body shaking with exhaustion and relief. He had survived the owl's game, but it had been the closest call of his entire time in the forest. As the adrenaline began to fade, Tom realized how lucky he had been. If he hadn't remembered the advice about the flashlight, if the light hadn't worked the way he hoped, if he had moved even a fraction of a second too slowly, the wolves would have torn him apart. But he had survived, and now he understood why other players spoke of the owl with such fear and respect. It wasn't just another monster to avoid. It was an intelligent predator that used strategy and psychological warfare to hunt its prey. Tom spent the rest of the night sitting close to his fire, too keyed up to sleep. Every sound in the forest made him jump. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. The rescued children had emerged from their tents after the wolves left, but they stayed close to Tom, clearly shaken by the night's events. As dawn approached, Tom heard a soft thud near his camp. When the sun rose enough for him to see clearly, he found a single owl feather lying on the ground where the creature had been standing. The feather was enormous, nearly a foot long, and had the same oily, unnatural sheen as the owl's other feathers. Tom picked up the feather carefully. It was proof of his encounter, evidence that he had survived the owl's game. But as he examined it more closely, Tom noticed something disturbing. The feather felt warm to the touch, and it seemed to pulse gently, as if it had a heartbeat. But that wasn't the most unsettling discovery. Scratched into the dirt near where the owl had landed was a message written in what looked like talon marks. The letters were crude but readable. "Next time, the game will be harder." Tom stared at the message, his blood running cold. The owl wasn't just a random forest creature following programmed behaviors. It was intelligent, learning, remembering. It had studied Tom's tactics during their encounter and was already planning how to counter them in future meetings. The creature had let Tom win this time, but only to learn his weaknesses and strategies. When it returned, and Tom was certain it would return, it would be ready for his flashlight trick and whatever else Tom might try. Tom quickly packed up his camp. He couldn't stay in this location anymore. The owl knew where he was, knew his defenses, knew his capabilities. He had to find a new place to build his base, somewhere the creature couldn't find him easily. But as Tom gathered his supplies and prepared to move to a new location, he kept hearing that strange wind sound, even though no breeze was blowing through the trees. The owl was already hunting him again, already beginning the next round of their deadly game. Tom loaded his most important items into his backpack and led the two rescued children away from the camp they had called home for so many days. The children followed without complaint. They seemed to understand that staying in one place after attracting the owl's attention would be suicide. As they walked through the morning forest, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, heard sounds that didn't quite match the normal forest noise, felt the weight of invisible eyes tracking their progress. The owl was out there somewhere, following at a distance, learning Tom's travel patterns and behavior. It was gathering information for their next encounter, planning how to make the game harder, just as its message had promised. Tom found a new location about 2 miles from his original camp, a small clearing near a stream, surrounded by thick trees that would provide good cover. He quickly set up a basic camp with the children's help, building a new campfire and crafting bench. But Tom knew this was only a temporary solution. The owl had demonstrated intelligence and patience. It would eventually find his new camp, just as it had found the first one. The question was whether Tom could prepare better defenses and strategies before their next meeting. Over the next few days, Tom worked frantically to improve his situation. He crafted multiple flashlights and stockpiled batteries. He built hidden supply caches throughout the surrounding area so he wouldn't be caught without resources. He practiced moving silently through the forest, trying to learn how to travel without attracting attention. Tom also started paying closer attention to the other players' discussions in the lobby between sessions. He sought out anyone who claimed to have encountered the owl and survived, trying to learn from their experiences. Most players who had faced the owl hadn't survived to tell about it. Those who had were reluctant to share details, as if talking about the creature might somehow summon it back to them. But Tom managed to piece together some useful information. The owl didn't appear every night, or even every few nights. It seemed to target players who had reached certain milestones. Day 20 was mentioned frequently, as were days 30, 40, and 50. The creature appeared to be programmed to test players at critical points in their progression. More disturbing were the reports that the owl learned from each encounter. Players who had survived one meeting often didn't survive the second. The creature adapted its tactics, countered previously successful strategies, and seemed to hold grudges against players who had escaped it before. Some players claimed the owl could appear during the day as well as at night, though these reports were harder to verify. If true, it meant the creature wasn't bound by the same rules that kept the deer monster inactive during daylight hours. Tom also learned about the feathers. Every player who survived an owl encounter found one of the massive feathers near their camp afterward. Some players kept them as trophies, others threw them away immediately, but several players reported that keeping the feather seemed to increase the chances of another owl encounter. Tom looked at the feather he had saved from his encounter. It was still warm to the touch, still seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Was it some kind of tracking device, allowing the owl to monitor his location, or was it something else entirely? Tom made the difficult decision to bury the feather far from his camp. He didn't want to throw it away completely. It was proof of his survival, evidence of his skill. But he couldn't risk having it nearby if it might attract the owl back to him. Days 25, 26, and 27 passed peacefully. Tom began to hope that maybe the owl had moved on to target other players. Maybe his relocation had worked and the creature had lost track of him. On day 28, Tom rescued the third missing child, Bunny Kid, from a cave complex guarded by a pack of alpha wolves. The rescue was dangerous and exhausting, but Tom was getting better at combat tactics and had upgraded his equipment significantly since his early days in the forest. The third child was even more traumatized than the first two. Bunny Kid barely spoke and would only eat if Tom fed him personally. The child had clearly been through terrible experiences during his captivity, and Tom felt a surge of anger at whatever forces were responsible for the children's suffering. But Tom also felt proud of his progress. 3 children rescued, nearly a month survived, and he was getting close to the game's midpoint. Maybe he really could make it all the way to 99 days. That confidence lasted until day 30. Tom was working on upgrading his crafting bench when he heard it, that familiar wind sound that meant the owl was active. But this time, it was different. Instead of the gentle whooshing he had experienced before, this sounded like a storm approaching. The message appeared on his screen. The owl remembers. Tom's heart sank. The creature had found his new camp. Worse, it remembered him from their previous encounter and was ready to make the game harder, just as it had promised. But this time, Tom was better prepared. He had multiple flashlights ready, knew the owl's basic patterns, and had practiced his response strategies. He gathered the 3 children and moved them to the safest part of the camp, then took his position by the campfire with his weapons and lights ready. The owl didn't appear immediately. Instead, Tom heard other sounds in the forest, not just wolves this time, but other creatures as well. Bears growling in the distance, strange bird calls that didn't match any normal forest sounds, even what sounded like human voices, though Tom couldn't make out words. When the owl finally landed at the edge of Tom's campfire light, it wasn't alone. The creature had brought an entire menagerie of forest predators with it. Wolves, bears, large birds of prey, and even some animals Tom couldn't identify in the darkness. But the most disturbing addition to the owl's army was a group of figures that looked almost human. They wore tattered clothes and moved with jerky, unnatural motions. Tom realized with horror that these must be other players, people who had failed the owl's game and been converted into something else. The eye symbol above the owl's head was already red when it appeared, pulsing with angry intensity. The creature had learned from their previous encounter. It wasn't going to give Tom any time to prepare or think. The game was starting at maximum difficulty. Tom raised his flashlight immediately, shining it at the owl's eyes. But the creature was ready for this tactic. It ducked its head and spread one wing to block the light, then gestured with its other wing toward its assembled army. The attack came from all sides at once. Wolves charged from the east and west, bears lumbered in from the north, and the converted players shambled toward the camp from the south. The birds circled overhead, diving down to attack whenever Tom tried to focus his light on the owl. Tom fought desperately, using his spear to keep the wolves at bay while trying to maintain his position near the campfire. But there were too many attackers coming from too many directions. His light could only focus on one target at a time, and the owl's army took advantage of every moment when Tom's attention was elsewhere. A wolf got past Tom's spear and knocked him to the ground. Tom rolled away, just as a bear's claws raked the earth where his head had been. He scrambled back to his feet, but now he was further from the campfire and closer to the converted players. Up close, the converted players were even more horrifying. They had been human once, but their eyes were now the same amber color as the owl's, and their movements were controlled by the creature's will rather than their own consciousness. They reached for Tom with grasping hands, trying to drag him away from the safety of the firelight. Tom swung his spear in wide arcs, keeping the converted players back while trying to work his way toward the campfire. But the wolves were circling behind him, and the bears were closing in from both sides. That's when Tom remembered something from his research. The owl's intelligence was also its weakness. It was so focused on coordinating its complex attack that it might be vulnerable to unexpected tactics. Instead of trying to fight his way back to the campfire, Tom did something completely unpredictable. He charged directly toward the owl. The creature was so surprised by this aggressive move that it hesitated for a crucial second. Tom tackled the massive bird, wrapping his arms around its body and pointing his flashlight directly at its face from point-blank range. The owl shrieked in rage and surprise, trying to break free from Tom's grip, but Tom held on tight, keeping the light focused on the creature's eyes despite its thrashing and clawing. The eye symbol above the owl's head began to flicker rapidly between red and white, as if the creature's control systems were overloading. The assembled army of predators and converted players stopped their coordinated attack and began milling around in confusion. Tom pressed his advantage, increasing the flashlight's brightness to its maximum setting. The owl's struggles became more frantic, and its control over the other creatures began to slip even further. Finally, the eye symbol switched to white and stayed there. The change was immediate. The wolves stopped attacking and began walking back into the forest. The bears lost interest and wandered away. Even the converted players stopped their shambling advance and stood still, as if waiting for new orders that never came. The owl itself went limp in Tom's arms, no longer fighting against his grip. The creature looked at Tom with what might have been confusion or even respect, then gently pushed itself away from him and took a few steps back. For a moment, Tom and the owl stared at each other in the flickering light of the campfire. The creature tilted its massive head and made a soft sound that was almost like a question. Then it spread its wings and took flight, disappearing into the darkness without another sound. Tom collapsed next to his campfire, exhausted and shaking. He had survived the owl's second game, but it had been even more difficult and dangerous than the first. If he hadn't thought of that desperate tackle at the last moment, he would have been overwhelmed and probably converted into one of the creature's mindless servants. As dawn broke, Tom found not one but 3 owl feathers near his camp. Each one was larger than the previous feather he had found, and all 3 pulsed with that same warm rhythmic energy. But this time, there was no message scratched into the dirt. Instead, Tom found something much more disturbing. A crude map drawn in the soil, showing the locations of several camps throughout the forest. Tom recognized his previous camp location, his current camp, and several other spots he had considered as potential base sites. The owl had been tracking him far more thoroughly than Tom had realized. It knew not just where he was, but where he had been and where he might go next. The creature had been studying him constantly, learning his patterns and preferences. Tom realized he was trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse with an opponent that was far more intelligent and patient than he had initially understood. The owl wasn't just a random encounter or a programmed challenge. It was a persistent hunter that would continue pursuing him with ever-increasing sophistication until either Tom escaped the forest entirely or became another addition to the creature's collection of converted players. Tom buried the 3 new feathers even further from his camp than he had buried the first one, but he suspected it wouldn't matter. The owl's tracking abilities went beyond simple proximity to physical objects. The creature seemed to have some supernatural ability to monitor and follow players who had attracted its attention. Over the next few days, Tom considered his options. He could try to reach day 99 as quickly as possible, using time acceleration techniques to skip through days rapidly. But that approach was risky. If he made mistakes due to rushing, he might not survive long enough to reach the end goal. Alternatively, Tom could try to find other players who had encountered the owl and form a team. Multiple targets might confuse the creature or force it to divide its attention. But cooperation also meant trusting other players with his survival, and Tom had learned to be self-reliant during his time in the forest. A third option was to research the owl more thoroughly, trying to understand its behavior patterns and find more effective ways to counter its attacks. This approach would take time and might attract even more attention from the creature, but it could lead to breakthrough strategies that would help not just Tom but other players as well. Tom decided to combine all 3 approaches. He would continue progressing toward day 99 while also researching the owl and seeking potential allies. It was a complex strategy, but Tom felt he needed every advantage he could get. Days 31 through 35 passed without another owl encounter. But Tom knew the creature was still out there. He caught glimpses of large shadows flying overhead during the day. He heard that distinctive wind sound at night, even when no breeze was blowing. Sometimes he found tracks around his camp that were too large to belong to any normal bird. The owl was studying him, learning his new routines and defenses, preparing for their next encounter. Tom tried to vary his patterns as much as possible, never following the same schedule 2 days in a row, never taking the same routes through the forest, never using the same defensive strategies twice. On day 36, Tom encountered another player in the forest, a girl named Sage, who was on her own day 28. She was struggling with a cultist attack and about to be overwhelmed when Tom intervened, helping her fight off the robed attackers. "Thank you so much," Sage said, after the battle was over. "I thought I was finished for sure." Tom helped her tend to her wounds and shared some of his supplies. As they talked, he learned that Sage had also encountered the owl once, on her day 23. She had survived by hiding in an underground bunker she had discovered, waiting until dawn to emerge. "It circled my hiding spot all night," Sage told him. "I could hear it calling to other creatures, organizing search parties. It knew I was down there somewhere, but it couldn't pinpoint my exact location." This was valuable information. The owl's tracking abilities might have limitations after all. Underground locations could provide some protection, and the creature's supernatural senses apparently didn't work as well when targets were concealed behind stone or earth. Tom and Sage agreed to share information about the owl and coordinate their strategies. They established a system of hidden message drops so they could communicate even when playing on different servers. If one of them discovered a new tactic or weakness, they would share it with the other. Days 37 through 40 passed more smoothly with this cooperation. Tom and Sage helped each other with difficult rescues and resource gathering. Tom rescued the 4th and final missing child, Koala Kid, with Sage's assistance. The last child was the most traumatized of all, barely responding to external stimuli and requiring constant care. But having all 4 children in his camp also provided a significant advantage. Each rescued child had increased Tom's day multiplier, meaning he was progressing toward the 99-day goal much faster than normal. By day 40, Tom had effectively experienced the equivalent of more than 60 game days. The acceleration also seemed to confuse the owl's targeting systems. The creature appeared to track players based on their actual day count rather than their accelerated progression. This gave Tom hope that he might reach day 99 before the owl expected and escape the forest before their next encounter. But on day 41, Tom's hopes were dashed. He was upgrading his base defenses when the now familiar wind sound began. But this time, it was different again. Louder, more violent, like a hurricane approaching. The trees around Tom's camp began to sway despite the absence of any actual wind. The message on his screen was longer this time. The owl knows your tricks. The game ends tonight. Tom's heart raced. The creature had figured out his acceleration strategy and was making its final move. This wouldn't be another test or learning experience. This would be a decisive battle with no quarter given on either side. Tom gathered the 4 rescued children and moved them to the underground shelter he had prepared based on Sage's advice. The shelter was well stocked with food, water, and medical supplies. If Tom didn't survive the night, the children would at least have a chance to wait for rescue. "Stay here no matter what you hear," Tom told them. "Don't come out until the sun rises, and don't let anyone in unless they know the password we discussed." The children nodded solemnly. They had been through enough trauma to understand when a situation was truly dangerous. Tom sealed the shelter entrance and returned to his camp to await the owl's final assault. The creature appeared just after sunset, but it looked different than before. The owl was larger, its feathers darker, its eyes brighter. It had somehow grown stronger since their last encounter, as if it had been feeding on the fear and defeat of other players. Behind the owl came an army, unlike anything Tom had seen before. Not just wolves and bears this time, but creatures that seemed to have been twisted by the forest's dark influence. Multi-headed wolves, bears with glowing red eyes and metallic claws, birds with wingspans that defied natural physics, and leading the converted players was a figure Tom recognized with horror. It was Marcus, his friend who had originally challenged him to play the game. But Marcus's eyes now had the same amber glow as the owl's, and he moved with the same jerky, controlled motions as the other converted players. "Tom!" Marcus called out, in a voice that was his own, but somehow wrong. "The owl wants to offer you a choice. Join us willingly, and the transition will be painless. Fight, and we'll take you anyway, but it will hurt much more." Tom gripped his weapons tighter. "What happened to you, Marcus? How long have you been like this?" Marcus tilted his head in a gesture that was pure owl. "Time doesn't work the same way for us anymore. I've been hunting with the owl for what feels like forever, or maybe it's been no time at all. But I remember you now, Tom. I remember our friendship. That's why the owl is being merciful." "This isn't mercy," Tom replied. "This is slavery." Marcus laughed, but the sound was hollow and wrong. "You'll understand when you join us. The forest is so much more beautiful when you see it through the owl's eyes." The eye symbol above the owl's head was blazing red, brighter than Tom had ever seen it. The creature was done with games and tests. This was a hunt to the finish, with no possibility of escape or negotiation. Tom raised his flashlight and pointed it at the owl, but the creature was ready. It gestured with one wing, and several of the mutated birds dove at Tom from above, forcing him to dodge and duck instead of maintaining his light beam. The army of twisted creatures and converted players attacked from all sides simultaneously. This time, there was no confusion or hesitation in their assault. They moved with perfect coordination, each group covering the weaknesses of the others. Tom fought with desperate skill, using everything he had learned during his 41 days in the forest. He used his environment to his advantage, fought with multiple weapons simultaneously, and employed every trick and tactic he could remember. But there were simply too many opponents. For every creature Tom defeated, 2 more took its place. For every converted player he managed to stun with his flashlight, another one flanked him from a different direction. Gradually, Tom was driven back from his campfire toward the edge of his camp's defensive perimeter. His weapons were breaking, his supplies were running low, and his strength was failing. That's when Tom remembered the most important lesson he had learned during his time in the forest. Sometimes survival required sacrifice. Instead of continuing to fight the overwhelming army, Tom turned and ran toward his most dangerous defensive measure, the explosive trap he had hidden near the camp's fuel storage. If he could lure the owl and its army close enough to the trap, he might be able to eliminate them all in one desperate gambit. But it would mean destroying his camp, losing all his accumulated resources, and probably dying in the explosion himself. Tom sprinted toward the trap, with the owl's army in hot pursuit. He could hear the creature's wings beating behind him, feel the converted players grasping at his clothes, sense the twisted animals snapping at his heels. Just as Tom reached the trap location, he spun around and shone all of his remaining flashlights directly at the pursuing army. The sudden blazing light stunned them for just a moment, long enough for Tom to activate the trap and dive for cover behind a large tree. The explosion was tremendous, shaking the entire forest and sending flames high into the night sky. Trees caught fire, the ground cracked, and a crater formed where Tom's carefully built camp had stood. When the smoke cleared and Tom's ears stopped ringing, he emerged from behind the tree to survey the damage. His camp was completely destroyed, but more importantly, the owl's army was gone. The twisted creatures had been vaporized by the blast, and the converted players had simply vanished, as if the explosion had broken whatever spell controlled them. But the owl itself was still there. The massive creature stood in the center of the crater, its feathers singed and its stance unsteady, but very much alive. It looked at Tom with those enormous amber eyes, and for the first time, Tom saw something like respect in them. "You fight well," the owl said in a voice that was a combination of all its converted players. "Better than most, but the game isn't over yet." Tom realized he had made a critical mistake. The owl wasn't just another monster to be defeated. It was a fundamental part of the forest itself, something that couldn't be destroyed by conventional means. The explosion had eliminated its army and weakened it temporarily, but it would recover and continue the hunt. "What do you want from me?" Tom asked. The owl tilted its massive head. "I want you to understand what you're really fighting. This isn't just a game, Tom. This is a test. The forest needs guardians, beings who understand both the beauty and the danger of this place. Some players become guardians willingly. Others have to be converted. And if I refuse?" The owl spread its wings, which seemed to have grown even larger during their conversation. "Then we'll play one more game. If you win, you get to leave the forest and never return. If I win, you become my lieutenant, helping me test and train future players." Tom considered his options. He was exhausted, weaponless, and had no base to return to. But he had also learned more about the owl in the last few hours than any other player had discovered. Maybe that knowledge could give him an edge in one final confrontation. "What are the rules of this last game?" Tom asked. The owl's eyes gleamed. "Simple. You have until sunrise to reach the forest's edge. I'll hunt you during that time using all my abilities and knowledge. If you make it to the boundary, you win. If I catch you, you lose." Tom looked around at the destroyed landscape, calculating distances and routes. The forest's edge was at least 5 miles away through difficult terrain, and he would have to travel in darkness with the owl actively pursuing him. But Tom had spent 41 days learning the forest's secrets. He knew hidden paths, concealed shelters, and defensive positions that even the owl might not be aware of. If he was clever and lucky, he might actually have a chance. "I accept," Tom said. The owl nodded solemnly. "The game begins now. You have a 5-minute head start, then I will begin hunting. Remember, Tom, this time, there are no second chances." Tom didn't waste time responding. He turned and ran into the dark forest, using every bit of speed and stealth he had developed during his time as a survivor. Behind him, the owl began counting down the minutes until the final hunt began. Tom ran through the forest like never before, using paths and shortcuts he had discovered during his many days of exploration. He knew the owl would be tracking him, so he tried to vary his route as much as possible while still making progress toward the forest's edge. The 5-minute head start felt like it lasted only seconds. Soon, Tom heard the familiar wind sound behind him, growing louder and more intense. The owl had begun its pursuit, and it was closing distance fast. Tom ducked under low branches and leaped over fallen logs, using the dense forest to break line of sight with his pursuer. He could hear the creature's wings beating above the canopy, but the thick trees provided some protection from aerial attacks. As Tom ran, he tried to remember everything he had learned about the owl's behavior patterns. The creature was intelligent, but seemed to have limitations. It relied heavily on its army of converted creatures, which Tom had eliminated with his explosive trap. It was most dangerous when it could coordinate complex attacks, but in a straight pursuit, it might be more vulnerable. Tom also remembered Sage's discovery about underground hiding places potentially providing protection from the owl's tracking abilities. There was a cave system about halfway to the forest edge that might offer temporary shelter and confusion for his pursuer. But first, Tom had to reach the caves without being caught. The owl's calls echoed through the forest behind him, and Tom could hear other sounds as well. The creature was somehow calling new allies to join the hunt. Not the same twisted monsters as before, but natural forest predators that were responding to the owl's supernatural influence. Tom pushed himself harder, his lungs burning and his legs aching. He couldn't afford to slow down or rest. The owl's advantage would only grow as time passed, and Tom's only hope was to maintain his head start until he reached better defensive positions. A wolf howled somewhere to Tom's left, then another to his right. The owl was coordinating a pincer movement, trying to drive Tom into a trap, but Tom had anticipated this tactic. Instead of continuing on his current path, he abruptly changed direction, heading toward more difficult terrain that would slow down the pursuing wolves. Tom scrambled up a steep rocky slope, using his hands as much as his feet to maintain traction on the loose stones. The wolves would have trouble following him here, and the owl would have difficulty landing in such uneven terrain. At the top of the slope, Tom paused to catch his breath and assess his situation. He could see the owl circling in the distance, its massive form silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The creature was staying back for now, probably coordinating its ground forces before making another direct assault. Tom used this brief respite to plan his next moves. The cave system was still about 2 miles away, but the route would take him through relatively open ground where the owl would have every advantage. He needed a better strategy. That's when Tom remembered the underground river that ran through this part of the forest. If he could reach the river and follow it underground, he might be able to approach the caves from an unexpected direction. The underground route would also provide protection from the owl's aerial surveillance. Tom began working his way down the far side of the rocky slope, heading toward the river access point he had discovered weeks ago. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall and would be difficult for the owl to spot from above. But the owl was smarter than Tom had hoped. As he approached the waterfall, Tom heard the distinctive wind sound directly ahead of him. The creature had somehow anticipated his plan and was waiting at the river entrance. Tom froze behind a large boulder, considering his options. He could try to find an alternative route, but that would cost precious time and might lead him into other traps. He could attempt to fight his way past the owl, but he had no weapons and would be at a massive disadvantage in direct combat. Or he could try the most dangerous option of all, use the owl's intelligence against it by doing something completely unexpected. Tom picked up several large stones from the ground and threw them into the forest in different directions, creating multiple sounds that might confuse the owl's tracking. Then, while the creature was investigating the false signals, Tom sprinted directly toward the waterfall. The owl reacted quickly, turning back toward Tom's real position and swooping down for an attack. But Tom had timed his move perfectly. He reached the waterfall entrance just as the creature's talons raked the air where his head had been. Tom dove through the falling water and into the underground river system. The current was strong and cold, but it carried him away from the owl's immediate reach. Behind him, he could hear the creature's frustrated calls echoing off the cave walls. The underground river carried Tom through a maze of tunnels and chambers, some of which he had explored before, and others that were completely new to him. The darkness was absolute, but Tom used his knowledge of cave systems to navigate by touch and sound. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 or 30 minutes, Tom emerged from the river in a cave chamber he recognized. He was now less than a mile from the forest edge, and the underground route had helped him avoid most of the owl's pursuit. But as Tom climbed out of the water, he realized he wasn't alone in the cave. Standing in the shadows was Marcus, the converted version of his friend. Somehow, Marcus had survived the explosion and tracked Tom to this location. "I was hoping you'd come this way," Marcus said in his eerily controlled voice. "The owl knew you tried to use the underground routes. It's been watching you learn the forest's secrets for weeks." Tom backed away from his converted friend, looking for another exit from the cave chamber. But Marcus moved to block the only other passage, trapping Tom in the dead-end chamber. "You don't have to fight anymore, Tom," Marcus continued. "The conversion process isn't painful once you stop resisting. You'll still be yourself, just better. More aware of the forest's true nature." "You're not Marcus anymore," Tom replied. "You're just a puppet being controlled by that thing." Marcus smiled sadly. "I remember being Marcus. I remember our friendship, our competition, our shared love of gaming. But I also remember how empty that life was compared to what I have now. The forest has shown me purpose, Tom. It can show you the same thing." Tom looked around the cave chamber desperately. The walls were solid stone, the ceiling was too high to reach, and Marcus was blocking the only exit. But Tom noticed something his converted friend might have missed, a narrow crack in the far wall that might lead to another passage. Tom faked a stumble, then rolled toward the crack, while Marcus was momentarily off balance. The opening was barely wide enough for Tom to squeeze through, but he managed to force himself into the narrow passage just as Marcus lunged after him. The passage was cramped and uncomfortable, but it led upward toward what Tom hoped would be another exit. Behind him, he could hear Marcus trying to follow, but the converted player was slightly larger and couldn't fit through the tight space as easily. Tom crawled through the narrow passage for what felt like forever, his knees and elbows scraping against the rough stone. Finally, he saw a faint light ahead, another cave entrance that led back to the surface. Tom emerged from the cave system less than half a mile from the forest edge. Dawn was still at least an hour away, but Tom could see the lighter patch of sky that marked the forest boundary. He was closer than he had dared hope, but the owl was waiting for him. The massive creature stood directly between Tom and the forest edge, its wings spread wide and its amber eyes glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. There would be no avoiding this final confrontation. "You've played the game well," the owl said as Tom approached. "Better than any player I've encountered in years. But the game ends here, one way or another." Tom stopped about 50 feet away from the creature, close enough to communicate, but far enough to have a chance of dodging if the owl attacked. "Why do you do this? What's the point of converting players and keeping them in the forest?" The owl tilted its massive head. "The forest is dying, Tom. Each year, fewer people appreciate its beauty and mystery. More players treat it as just another game to beat rather than a world to explore and understand. The converted players become guardians, protecting the forest's secrets and ensuring that future visitors have properly challenging experiences. But you're taking away their free will. You're turning them into slaves. I'm giving them purpose, the owl corrected. Marcus is happier now than he ever was in the outside world. He has a role to play, important work to do. The same could be true for you. Tom shook his head. I won't give up my freedom, no matter how you try to justify it. The owl's eyes flared brighter. Then we'll finish this the hard way. The creature launched itself into the air and dove toward Tom with incredible speed. Tom rolled to one side, narrowly avoiding the owl's massive talons. The creature landed heavily and spun around for another attack. Tom ran toward the forest edge, but the owl was faster. It landed in front of him again, cutting off his escape route. Tom dodged left, then right, but the creature matched his movements perfectly. You can't outrun me forever, the owl called. Save us both time and accept your conversion willingly. Tom was running out of options. The forest edge was tantalizingly close, but the owl's superior speed and size made it impossible to reach through direct flight. Tom needed a strategy that used his human intelligence against the creature's physical advantages. That's when Tom remembered the most important lesson from all his encounters with the owl. The creature's intelligence was also its greatest weakness. It always overthought situations, planning elaborate strategies when simple attacks would be more effective. Tom stopped running and turned to face the owl directly. You want to know something funny? Tom said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his exhaustion and fear. You're not nearly as smart as you think you are. The owl's eyes narrowed. Explain. You've spent all this time trying to convert me, trying to make me understand the forest's true nature. But you never considered that maybe I already understand it better than you do. Impossible. You're just a visitor, a temporary presence. I am eternal, connected to every tree and stone. Tom smiled. Then why have I been able to outthink you at every encounter? Why have I survived challenges that defeated hundreds of other players? It's not because I'm stronger or faster than them. It's because I understand something you don't. The owl took a step closer, clearly intrigued despite itself. And what is that? The forest doesn't want guardians, Tom said. It wants visitors. It wants people to explore it, challenge it, learn from it, and then leave to tell others about their experiences. You're not protecting the forest. You're corrupting it by trapping people who should be free to choose their own paths. The owl's eyes blazed with anger. You understand nothing. Without guardians, the forest would be forgotten, abandoned, destroyed by those who see it as nothing more than entertainment. Maybe, Tom conceded, but at least it would be free. At least the people who came here would be making their own choices instead of being forced into servitude by a creature that's too afraid of change to let nature take its course. The owl let out a screech of pure rage and launched itself at Tom with all its fury. But Tom was ready. Instead of dodging away from the creature, he ran directly toward it, sliding under its outstretched talons at the last second. The owl's momentum carried it past Tom's position, and by the time it could turn around, Tom was already sprinting toward the forest edge. The creature gave chase, but Tom's desperate gambit had given him the head start he needed. Tom crossed the forest boundary just as the first rays of dawn began to illuminate the sky. The moment his feet touched the ground beyond the forest's edge, he felt a tremendous weight lift from his shoulders. He was free. Behind him, the owl landed at the exact boundary line and stared at Tom with unreadable eyes. The creature could not cross the forest's edge. It was bound to the woodland by the same supernatural forces that gave it power within that realm. You have won this game, the owl said formally. You are free to leave and never return. But know this, Tom, the forest will remember you. If you ever enter these woods again, the final game will resume exactly where we left off. Tom nodded, understanding the terms. And Marcus? What happens to him and the other converted players? The owl was silent for a long moment. They have chosen their path, just as you have chosen yours. Perhaps someday they will choose differently. With that cryptic statement, the owl spread its wings and disappeared into the forest depths. Tom watched it go, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. He had won his freedom, but at the cost of leaving his friend trapped in a form of existence that barely qualified as life. Tom walked away from the forest edge without looking back. He had survived 99 nights in the forest and escaped the owl's deadly game. He was one of the few players who had ever achieved complete victory. But Tom knew he would never play 99 nights in the forest again. Some games were too dangerous to risk a second attempt, and some victories were too costly to repeat. As Tom returned to his normal life, he sometimes wondered about the players still trapped in the forest, still playing the owl's game. He hoped that someday they would find their own paths to freedom. But Tom also knew that the forest would always be there, waiting for new players to discover its secrets and face its challenges. The game would continue, with or without him. And somewhere in the deep woods, the owl continued its eternal watch, testing visitors and seeking worthy guardians for a realm that existed somewhere between reality and nightmare. The game never truly ended. It only paused between players, waiting for the next person brave enough or foolish enough to spend 99 nights in the forest and discover what lay beyond the boundaries of normal gaming. Tom had won his freedom, but the forest's mysteries remained unsolved, and the owl's ultimate purpose remained unknown. The game continued, as it always had and always would, until someone found a way to break the cycle completely, or the forest itself decided that its time of testing was finally over. But that would be someone else's story to tell. Tom was free, and that was enough.